Alfred Hitchcock is remembered for his famous movies like Vertigo and Psycho. But the British director focused an equal amount of time on the small screen. He hosted Alfred Hitchcock Presents from 1955 to 1962, and then it changed from 1962 to 65 to the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. Who can forget the silhouette of Alfred Hitchcock's head and also the theme music that introduced each show of the TV series? Now, the show was actually an anthology series with a rotating cast, but it maintained continuity for the audience by keeping the director front and center for each introductory segment. Each of these dryly witted sequences was written by Hitchcock and one of his collaborators. And Hitchcock goes on to set up the episode's premise, and he often addresses the audience directly. Alfred Hitchcock couldn't stand TV commercials, and he would often make derogatory comments about the commercials that the audience was about to see. In one segment leading into a story involving medicine, he braces the audience to prepare for an ad break, calling it a 1-minute anesthetic. For the audiences that were international that couldn't see American product advertising, Hitchcock instead used alternate footage that eliminated the sponsorship jabs, and he instead poked fun at the Americans. Now, the big question is that why would the sponsors put up with this? And the answer to that is that Alfred Hitchcock Presents drew consistently high ratings, and so that meant plenty of eyeballs were on their products. Now, the series has a lot in common with Hitchcock films, particularly the scheming characters with murder on the mind. But his involvement in the show was fairly limited. He was just terribly busy with his movie career. But he actually convinced an MCA executive, Lew Wasserman, that lending his name and likeness out to the series would not take up too much of his time. Now, he used producers and collaborators that he was familiar with to do the production chores of the TV series. So he still had quite a bit of control on it. He just didn't have as much hands-on as he did in the films. It's said that his oversight of the show was basically offering fatherly words of advice to the people that were directing and producing it. But the viewers thought that he was doing it all. They thought that he wrote everything and directed everything that was seen on the small screen. And this was noted by fan letters that started pouring into the show. When he initially set the series up, he decided to lay some groundwork for the production. He decided that its tone of darkly comic, suspenseful narratives could be maintained with a simple set of guidelines for the researchers doing the short stories and for them to adapt them to the screen. His big rule was that it should be a suspense show with a thriller-type atmosphere that had a climax that should have almost a twist or a shocking point in the last line or the last situation. The title sequence of the show was an exercise in just complete simplicity. It shows a silhouette of the robust director accompanied by an 1872 funeral march. Eventually, Hitchcock steps into his side profile portrait, which dissolves into the introduction. The funny thing about this is that Hitchcock actually drew the silhouette that you see of himself. He actually drew this silhouette to be sent out on a Christmas card list when he was back in England. Now, there were tons of notable actors that actually appear on the show. Bruce Dern, Peter Falk, Peter Fonda, Martin Landau, Lee Majors, Jane Mansfield, Gloria Swanson, and that's just a few. There is a long list. Now, Bob Newhart actually played a murderous husband on the show. He took marital discord to a new level in the episode called How to Get Rid of Your Wife, which was a devilish plot involving rat poison. In this episode, you'll also see Joyce Jameson, who played one of the fun girls in the Andy Griffith Show. She played Skippy. In his blackly comedic interludes between the segments, Hitchcock would often play with silly props with a straight face. He turned a surfboard into an ironing board. He held a gigantic house key. And during the episode called Final Vow, he puts a tattoo on a slab of beef. In the early 1960s, he tried to get Walt Disney to give him permission to film, at that time, at his relatively new theme park in Anaheim. Walt Disney denied the director access to the Magic Kingdom, and he cited his reason as the disgust that he had for the movie Psycho. There were also some pretty legendary names that directed some episodes. William Friedkin, who directed The French Connection and The Exorcist, shot an episode called Off Season. Now, this was his first non-documentary type work as a young director. It's said that Alfred Hitchcock actually jumped on him for not wearing a tie on the set. Sidney Pollack also handled a couple episodes. There were also some big-name crime writers that handled some scripts. Patricia Highsmith, who wrote Strangers on a Train, which Hitchcock would go on to famously adapt. Dean Stockwell was involved. Robert Bloch and Richard Matheson also chipped in to help on the scripts, and their scripts were typically fantastic. While there were none of the actual criminal deeds depicted in Alfred Hitchcock Presents that were very explicit, one episode in Season 7, written by the Psycho writer Robert Bloch, inferred something so disturbing that it was kept off the air by NBC. In The Sorcerer's Apprentice, a boy who dreams of becoming a magician is coerced into murdering his stage idol by the performer's cheating spouse. She convinces him to do it by telling the young boy, who's not that bright, that he will absorb her husband's powers once the deed is done. He believes this and proceeds to saw her in half, despite not having much of an idea about how the illusion is actually supposed to work. At the conclusion of the episode, Hitchcock makes a characteristically grim observation. He states that the scheming widow must be beside herself. Now, later on, this episode did run in syndication. Now, one of the episodes in the series actually started a famous morbid playground game that kids used to play. In the episode called The Man from the South, based on a short story, a man, played by Steve McQueen, who's low on funds, decides to wager that he can open his lighter 10 times without fail. Because he has no money, the compulsive gambler, played by Peter Lorre, making the bet, insists that McQueen risk his pinky finger instead. The 1960 episode led to a playground activity played by children called the Zippo Game, where they attempted to light the flame 10 times. They did not, however, wager their fingers. In 1962, Alfred Hitchcock Presents expanded to an hour-long format. Hitchcock was really pleased with that decision, saying that it gave time for the story to expand, and that episodes could be drawn from novels, not just short stories. They retitled the series the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. It aired for 3 seasons on NBC before they pulled the plug on the show. The primary problem was the increased production cost, but the fans of the series were also sensing a complete loss of the suspense and urgency that they had threaded throughout the shorter episodes. Hitchcock himself directed only one of the hour-long episodes before the show was retired. He uttered his final good night on May 10th, 1965. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.